extremely pleased to introduce our first fine arts event of this academic year with a talk by artist Helen Cammock. Cammock's interdisciplinary practice spans film, photography, print, text, song, and performance, and engages with historical and contemporary narratives around oppression and resistance, wealth and power, poverty and vulnerability. In her work, Cammock excavates lost, unheard, or buried voices, revealing histories where oppression and resilience intertwine. Tonight, we will get a glimpse into Cammock's research methodology, which she will introduce using extracts from 3 films. Che si può fare, a film produced for the Max Mara Art Prize for Women, where she interweaves women's stories of loss and resilience with 17th century Baroque music by female composers. The Long Note, joint winner of the 2019 Turner Prize, a film that gives voice to the women who took part in the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland from the end of 1960s, and the 2022 film Bus Notes and Sight Lines, the voice as a site of resistance and the body as a site of resilience, a collaborative project with both people receiving care and those who offer it through adult social care work, exploring resistance through music and voice. And now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Helen Cammock.
Grazie mille, Marta. Buonasera. Yes, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back in Rome after a few years away. I have to apologize, first off, that I don't speak Italian, so the talk will be in English. So please feel free to ask me to repeat anything or questions afterwards. And I hope I haven't tried to pack too much into the talk, but I'll miss things out if I have. I'll focus on what I'm interested in exploring in my practice and how I come to be an artist and my connection to Italy through the Max Mara Art Prize for Women, which first brought me here to Rome in 2018. I'm going to give a couple of readings that I hope are an example of how I work with language, and we'll have a PowerPoint of images going here just as a rolling program, looping, so you have something to look at while I'm talking. I'll begin then with how I became an artist, for those who don't know about my practice or my story. I came to art late. I was 34 and had been a social worker for about 10 years, working with families and vulnerable young people, families mostly affected by domestic violence, and running a range of group programs was a large part of my work. Then came the inevitable cuts that seemed to happen in every country, and I began to feel that I wasn't able to support the people in a genuine way. So my partner at the time suggested I did something to offer me something less stressful to do alongside my work, and I did an evening class in photography at the local university. This evening class turned into 2 evening classes a week and then a Saturday program as well, and I realized that I wanted to do something else. So with the help of one of my tutors, I got a portfolio together, and before I knew it, I was studying for an undergraduate degree in photography, which the story is too long for how I ended up doing a master's, but I ended up doing a master's at the Royal College of Art. And then through the support of other artists, which was a really big thing for me, gallerists and then curators, somehow brought me to be nominated for and then winning the Max Mara Art Prize for Women in 2017. So that birthed, I guess, a 6-city residency that saw me meeting a diverse range of people, museums, archives, and the beginning of my attempt to learn to sing a 17th century pre-opera lament, Che si può fare, by Barbara Strozzi. I mean, that project was enormous. The 6 months in Italy were enormous. And what came out of it was a 3-screen video work called Che si può fare, 3-meter screen, some of these prints here that are kind of abstractions, or an abstraction view of a voice, a harp and a trumpet, which were recurring themes across the 6 months. And then these, which were performances that happened with women in both London and in Reggio Emilia. So I'm going to just read a little bit of an abstract text now about how I see the way that I work and why I work in this way. So the multiple plentitude of histories, their intersectionality and their potential as a kind of mapper and a lens, the intersectionality of all experience, even when it is minimized or goes unacknowledged or unseen, and the voice, all of its different registers, its different forms, its potential and its potency, all overlap and weave through my practice. My commitment to reading and understanding my position in any given situation is inherent in my approach to making work, because for me, everything is relational, and this relational shifting is all about movement. And this movement, or flux, is part of how structural maps and emotional experiences, for me, collide or glide across each other, and therefore they must be reflected in the way that I approach making work. And I guess what this means is I believe there is no such thing as a resting place. Everything moving all the time, everything a negotiation and a renegotiation. Nothing stands still. Things keep moving around, cycles upon cycles, repeating challenges, battles, subjugations. Something shifts forward and something comes back around, taking new form. Dialogue with a trace, the vestiges of before, sometimes diluted, sometimes concentrate, but always shape-shifted, perhaps slightly, perhaps temporarily, perhaps permanently, but always visibly if you commit to the looking, the hearing, and the accepting of this flux. And for me, this is an activation of history through moving image, performance, and print became an act for an intentional unraveling or unfurling, and the Benjaminian notion of now time has never lost its relevance to me. The idea that now becomes historical and now is historical because of what we are given as tools to understand the moment that we're in. These scattered moments that float and resurface, colliding constellations that experience ricochet with memory, stories, texts, norms, values, and each informs the other until we all understand different historical interpretations, sometimes at odds with a dominant historical narrative, and sometimes one that moves in and out like a dance, and sometimes with one that feels invisible to others. It crosses time, this understanding, and is passed down through generations, one to the next, and across nations and continents, moving and flowing as a river, with tributaries and a smell of the sea, affected and yet unencumbered in its endurance. A little like the way that Deleuze might consider the fold, shifting dimensional planes of consciousness and subconscious experience. All the transgressions are both agile and cumbersome, acknowledged and traversed, denied and erased. It's all relational. We are all relational, and histories are the same, tied by threads of both knowing and unknowing, belief and disbelief, collusion and resistance, but we're tied nevertheless. So as an artist working in video, print, photography, writing, performance, and installation, I realized quite quickly that everything began to flow like my river from writing. How I develop ideas, how I process, the role of language in exclusion and inclusion, manipulation, control, challenge, activation. Language is extremely powerful. In the beginning of my practice, I moved quite quickly from making series of still images to incorporating text into my photographic projects, and then finding myself wanting to begin moving away from still images into moving images, because I found that for me, this enabled a greater scope for working with language and the kind of slippage that I was looking for, the in-between. I've always written. It took me a long time to learn to read as a child, but I always wrote. So reading didn't really happen, and writing did everywhere. On every wall I could, I was always writing. Poetry, fragmentary texts, and songs. So this felt like a pretty organic transition for me. And this working in the in-between space that I talked about, the idea of the linear and the non-linear intersecting somehow to make new space for meaning and understanding. I'm interested in moments of slippage and passage that tug at the way our understanding of histories is constructed, and then somehow representing it sometimes, and sometimes it's a way of unpicking it or fragmenting it by the repositioning of an additional or alternate stories. Yes, so this idea that histories are multiple, they're circular, they never run in a kind of linear way, and they're in the main linked to the maintenance of kind of dominant power stories. As much as I can, I use research to underpin the work that I make. So the idea that experiences cross geography and space is further extended by this research process. And often, but not always, I use archives. Almost every project, I think when I was in Italy, every place I spent my month in each of the 6 cities, I used archives and libraries as part of a way to anchor myself to the space alongside the kind of inhabiting, the wandering, the walking, the tasting, the smelling of the cities that I was in. These archives then can be formal or kind of looser informal archives or collections, or they can be living archives like communities of elders or refugees or people who have survived cancer and so on. The idea of this kind of collective yet individually distinct experience that then becomes a history or a historical document through the utterance of it. I believe really strongly that the individual lived experience can always speak to much wider structural, social, and political concerns. Initially, when I started to make work, most of my early films, I focused on my own lived experience, being used to explore different stories. But over time, this has evolved, where I might be in the work through narration, but it's not always my personal story. In the way that everything is our story, even if it is not exactly our story. There's something about that in-between space that we speak to each other's stories all the time. I'm also interested in how the impact of these things, histories, experience, and legacy, have on an individual and collective psyche, what it does to us. And so the development of identity in communities, how that happens, how it develops through the idea of telling stories and our stories. I am very cautious generally about making work that's entirely outside of my experience, but sometimes it's important. And I think for all of us, I'm sure, and I hope there are some artists in this space tonight, that we are interested in things that are outside of what we've lived. And I think it's a difficult question, I think, sometimes to decide whether to make work that's outside of what we know and what we understand. And I think it's important for us to be wary. And I think an example of this, I suppose, for me was when I was invited to make the film The Long Note, which, as Marta already described, in fact, you described a lot. I was worried I wasn't going to have anything to say. But yeah, so the Long Note, which it was about the impact of women in the civil rights movement in the north of Ireland. And when the curator asked me if I'd make it, initially I said no, I don't think I should make it. I'm not from the north of Ireland. I wasn't part of the Troubles there. I didn't experience that. I don't have a family legacy, although I do in Ireland, but not in north of Ireland. And so I immediately said no. And then she called me up and she said, I really, really want you to come and meet people here. I think there is a story to be told, and you are interested in making work about marginal stories, the stories that sit beneath the surface, and I think you would be a really good person to come and make those stories above the surface. And so I went for the visit and I met people and I realized that actually it could be done. And it was the first time I'd ever thought maybe I could possibly make work outside of my lived experience. And I think it was the beginning of me trying to find strategies of how I could make that work and acknowledge somehow that I was on the outside, but that the film was also subjective. I was defining the story, the narrative, and so that I needed to somehow place myself or cite myself somehow on the outside. What did I do? So there were a couple of sections where I made sure that I read, and my English voice, my English accent, was reading a couple of the stories, which for me was about introducing a kind of contrasting cultural sound. The English voice is incredibly violent in Irish histories, and so although I wasn't there, I wasn't born, it was important that my voice represented something, and I was really conscious of that walking in Northern Ireland, what my accent represented to people. And so it increasingly, I felt like it had to be heard in the film as well, to place myself somehow in relation with the people who were taking centre stage. I made sure that those interviews and the voices that were in the film took centre stage in the film and not mine, which was the way that I usually made films. My narrative was the dominant voice, if you like. And so I had an Irish poet, Colette Bryce, in it. I had Margot Harkin, who was a filmmaker. There was a trade unionist. There was an activist and journalist. These voices were of women who were part of the civil rights movement, and they took the centre stage. And there's one moment in the film where I walk in the rain and I clean the lens of my camera, and you can see me. You can see my face. You can see my skin. And for me, this was really important to have in it. I kind of filmed it by accident because I saw there was rain on the lens of my camera. And then when I started to edit the film, I realized that it was really, really significant to have that moment, because later on in the film, I interview Bernadette Devlin McCalskey, and she talks about the Black civil rights movement in the US and their influence on her political ideas, her political development, and on her feminism. And so it felt like it was a moment. I didn't know I was going to have that particular conversation with Bernadette, but we started to talk about race. And so this is something of the way that you bring yourself, or I felt like I was bringing myself. So I think we're going to play a clip from the long note. Thanks, Pepe.
It wasn't an anti-woman movement, but I remember myself, first time I went to America was 1969, and that's where being a woman as opposed to being a man actually entered my intellectual consciousness, was in America. And I was very, very fortunate that it was in America, because where my own head was in relation to civil rights allowed me to skip the 2 pages of middle class white feminism. I just got past them, because in that context I could see what they were. But I remember being asked, did I consider myself oppressed as a woman? And my answer was, I haven't the time to find out. I'm already dealing with too many layers of oppression to figure that out. And so my understanding of feminism was through Black feminism, because I could see. I'm always explaining that when I met, because I was the darling of every kind of radical movement that was going, and liberal movement, but when I met white feminists, they were professional, I always remember them, they were professional, white, middle class people with more money than I knew people over here ever to have. They invariably had small dogs on leashes, and most of them had men on a leash as well. And they all had somebody doing what traditionally women would do. So they didn't wash their own dishes, they didn't clean their own houses, but neither the man on the leash nor the dog cleaned it for them. There was a woman of colour cleaned their house. And that was my introduction to feminism. Feminism is white middle class Americans who have women of colour who clean their house. What is the name of this? And it was women of colour in America who corrected the flaw in my thinking and gave me other ways of looking at that. So by the time I was in America, that was 69, I had no idea what feminism was. Only something more for me to worry about, and I didn't have time.
I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains that still binding me. Yeah. Wish I could say all the things that I can say when I'm relaxed. I'd be starting anew.
So in order to think about these cross-cultural and identity entanglements in both process and what I'm interested in, I use a range of textual and visual material in different forms of address. So poetry, political text, fictional text, song, philosophical text and stories. Most narratives are fragmentary in their form, but these fragments are brought together to form a kind of rhizomatic narrative. In moving away from just working in photography, I was then able to really think about the image itself, how it can be interrupted, its meaning dislocated and further constructed through this use of video, installation and text and so on. And I call this using the energized frame, something where there are a number of dialogues and platforms and conversations all going on at the same time, these layers in process as well as content. I also like to talk a lot about what I call the audible fingerprint, and how voiceover and scripting, mostly in the films, but the different ways I use voice in performance, in print, bring me into the piece of work and enable me to play with and explore ideas of authorship. Introducing myself to the viewer and representing words that are initially written by a novelist or a philosopher or a poet or a folk singer, into a text woven with my words, playing with the idea of authorship that questions both the meaning and impact when different people say the same words. In other words, how who we are defines the meaning of what is said and how it's received. This idea again of the relational. I'm also interested in thinking about what happens when different voices come together in dialogue, or when they're juxtaposed or intersecting, and this reworking of new meaning as well, new stories being told. This is probably the most apparent in films and performances. Yeah, some of the voices need to be at odds with my own, but many of voices I identify with. So some of the people that I might be reading are people that I have read before, people that I am excited by what they have to say. So, I don't know, Maya Angelou, Audre Lorde, Alice Walker, Claudia Jones, Jamaica Kincaid, Mary Oliver, Frantz Fanon, James Baldwin, and so on. But I'm also interested in different registers of the voice. They're really significant. So this idea of the spoken voice, the whispered voice, the sung voice, which I use quite a lot, and this idea of the silent voice, the poetic voice and the narrative voice. All of these I kind of shift and move from in performances, but also in film scripts. And sometimes I sing words that I think are very difficult to be heard. There's something about when you sing, it comes from somewhere deep, and when somebody is singing to you, it touches somewhere deep. So it comes from a deep place and it goes to a deep place. And so sometimes when things are harder to hear, it's a strategy that I would use. Form and colour are really important in my print work, photography and film, and these elements, as well as a space between image and text, were catalysts for me in moving to working across different mediums. I use colour to enhance the haptic quality in the work and to activate text. It's really helpful to carry and hold language and ideas and connectedness by offering a canvas of colour. It's also a floating space, a suspension that enables words and ideas and thoughts to be touched and considered and ingested. So it kind of gives it a space to rest somehow. The move towards a multidisciplinary practice for me has been really liberating. The first time I was invited to work in a print studio, I had no idea what I'm doing. It's only a little bit better now. I always have to have quite a lot of support, probably mostly because I'm really impatient, and you have to be incredibly impatient with many print processes. But I hope and I want to be really hands-on with all processes, even with mixing colours, because that's really important to me. And then song came into my practice as well, having been invited to a program in London called Hum, where an artist works with a writer, and they invite artists to come, and to a very contained and small audience, you're invited to try something you've never done before. And I didn't really know what to try, but Anne, who's the artist who runs it, said, "Oh, somebody told me that you used to kind of sing with a guitar. Why don't you try singing?" And I was like, "Oh my God, no, I'm not doing that." And she was like, and so I did. I gave it a go. I wrote a performance that moved from song to spoken word, song to spoken word. And that was in 2016, and now it's a kind of really stable and sustained part of my practice. Okay, now to Italy. In 2018, I had this 6-month residency after winning the Max Mara and visited 6 cities in 6 months. I had as a starting point 2 16th century composers, Barbara Strozzi and Francesca Caccini. And these informed an idea to explore certain aspects of lament, this idea of loss, longing, resistance, resilience in Italian culture, in moments of history and geography. So I jumped different moments historically, I jumped different places geographically, and it was, I guess, what I call a kind of intuitive randomness that artists can employ where perhaps historians cannot. But it was all about sensation and feeling and where I felt drawn. So music was this starting point, and I decided that in crossing these, I wanted to meet different women, either in archives or museums or in real life, and talk to them about ideas of lament and what that meant to them. So I, for example, through the archives and libraries, I met an experimental opera singer in Florence who told me that just from talking, she could hear my singing voice. A 92-year-old partisan fighter in Bologna, a dancer who hadn't danced for 25 years after a car crash in Florence, a Nigerian woman in Palermo who was new to Italy, the great photographer Letizia Battaglia, a Carmelite nun who ran support projects in Palermo, and a woman in Reggio Emilia who had worked closely with Oliver Tambo as part of the allegiance with the ANC in Reggio. She made the first Italian translation of Nelson Mandela's autobiography, The Struggle Is My Life, and she lived in a tiny flat in the suburbs of Reggio Emilia. So I was just completely blown away by the people that I was starting to meet, and I knew that I wanted to make a film that somehow spoke of their journeys. In the archives, I met Beatrice Cenci, the youngest woman at 22 to be executed here in Rome after killing her father, whose spinet is played at the beginning of the film by a 22-year-old young woman in Bologna on the original spinet that belonged to her. Then there's Lucretia Vizzana, who led a nuns' revolt, also in Bologna, because the Pope banned them from playing her compositions, including her trumpet works, because of the jealousy of her male counterparts and the size of the crowds who came to hear the performances every Sunday. And all these encounters needed to kind of somehow be woven together. into one story. And then the final part of that, which was the most taxing thing I have ever done in my entire life, and the most humiliating thing in so many ways, working with a singing teacher from the conservatoire, was to try to sing this pre-opera lament. And I decided again really quickly that in the Baroque I could hear the chromatic scaling that resonated with jazz for me. And so I learned to sing this with the idea that I would play it as a duet with a jazz trumpet. And so that happened. In fact, the trumpeter that I played with in Reggio Emilia was from Rome. And in London, I played with a young jazz trumpeter from London. So, yes, and then there was the movement piece. And because Federica Peretti, who I stayed with in Florence and was the dancer who had choreographed a piece for the film about her own lament, we kept talking the whole time I was in Italy, and I decided that I really would like to make a movement piece with a group of women in London and a group of women in Reggio Emilia, and she came to both places, and we ran workshops in order to make a movement piece to Ciccona by Caccini, that was about loss and longing, and we performed that in both different exhibitions. So I'm just trying to not say too much and go on. I think maybe we'll just watch the first Che si può fare clip, so clip number 2, I think, rather than me explain everything. Beds of rust, iron and wire, hiccup and a banging window. The movement of madness, the presence of the sane. There's something about a pregnant girl that begins to gestate in me. Fear of the village, of the town, of a city, of a nation, of a continent, of a globe. So you see, this asylum was on the water, alone in the lagoon, and all the time keeping the fear at bay.
Liebe Fräulein, komm,
And you told me about the ships, and you told me about the tourists, and you told me about the danger, and you told me about the risks. So I guess people are everywhere in the work, even though they look like very empty scenes. The idea that they're there, even in their absence, is really important to me. A kind of phonic quilt that is created and then drapes the work. I guess that's my approach to making, which sometimes I get wrong, I think, but the approach is founded in care and patience and respect. One of my last large-scale projects, I Will Keep My Soul, was made in New Orleans over a period of a year, and as a kind of reflective, kaleidoscopic approach, a little bit in the way Kessi Pufare was the beginning of working like that. The questions in the work are around the relationship between musicians and artists and civil rights activists in New Orleans and the southern states of the US at different moments, and as drivers and witnesses to social change. In the work, as the outsider, I use the Amistad archive to explore questions historically while I meet people in a contemporary setting who either address the ideas behind the film or who enact them. So lots of artists and musicians who were working in that way. One historical figure is artist Elizabeth Catlett, who was, I'm running out of time, I think, but who was an activist and worked in many different ways on a kind of national level, but also in New Orleans through her work, fighting to not be told how she should make a statue of Louis Armstrong. And the book I make is a kind of, I suppose, it's a kind of montage of letters, of photographs, of memories, of texts, of writing. And when the shows opened in both LA and in New Orleans, we opened the show up to musicians in both cities, and they ran what we called the Quill Sessions, where they just came and inhabited the space, and people would come and listen to them play music and speak of their work and speak to each other, alongside some book groups and conversation groups that happened. Anyway, this is a short text that I wrote about working with archives. In my dreams, I asked you why you ended a line this way, why you decided to live here or move there. I wanted to sit, scared and unworthy, on a porch or by a stove with your eyes on my nervous legs chattering to their own song. You are more than one and I am many. This becomes clear as I open box upon box. Your name is long, then unfamiliar, misunderstood yet reimagined. Your loves and broken windows, your peonies as yet unshared with me. I journey through paper other fingers have caressed and kissed, through cultural yearning, historical learning, and I want to hear the coarseness in your voice, damaged from discussion into the blue hours of planning and strategy, the lilting accents that I don't remember hearing in other lives I've lived. I want to hear your voice as you chastise another author for his disregard of you. I'm always cold, temperature controlled, preservation of hurt and rage, artistry and rigour, laughter, devastation, reduced and recoiled in the slow archived time of existence. One afternoon we have our first meeting. The wind blows cold in the chill of yesterday, but I feel the tepid breath, whispered tones delicately calling me to bend an ear, drop down low, to reach across ocean, until page upon picture, picture upon ink, I'm with you, held by your gaze in locked cadence that swells and pulses, more on some days than others because you are gone, or I am tired, or we simply cannot connect through the box I pore over. A wrangled with hands, clumsy limbs knocking chair, then table, invisible bruise on brown skin, invisible bruises on brown skin, whipped and defiant, insightful, burned, rope and iron spittle and scorn. Submerged legislation, seaward dusty track, FBI is after you, CIA began the rot, run for your life as white hoods jump you, throw salt on the slug of parity. The madness of madness is here with me in the unravelling of lives left undone. So that's what I wrote when I was in the archive. So now I'd like to show you a clip that was part of a project with Serpentine Galleries in London. It's called Bass Notes and Sightlines, as Marta already said, in which I work with both care professionals and people who received care. The care professionals were social workers who worked with vulnerable adults, and also one specific project that worked with women who didn't live with their children, mostly because they had been officially removed from their care by the courts of law and the state. It was a very moving experience, and I learned a lot about the coping strategies employed by the women to survive each day with these feelings of loss and grief and shame and sometimes bewilderment and sometimes rage. And music was one of these strategies. All the women in this project talked about how much music meant to them, and many of them, almost all of them, said they found it too hard to sing because it was too painful, brought up too many emotions. So I proposed that we try to listen to the music, and that everyone found important to them. And slowly through our time together, I suggested that we write a song together. There were many exercises that we had to get to that point, and the writing of lyrics by the group, which happened. And then I wrote the melody and brought the song together. We had singing workshops in order that we might sing this song publicly in their neighbourhood where they lived, and to an audience of 500 at Serpentine Galleries. And later we went into a recording studio and made a professional recording of the song. We were joined by some of the other social workers in the project, and also a community choir who helped support our melodies, our harmonies actually. So here is a clip from Bass Notes and Sightlines.
Oh, that's great. You have a quite nice, long and thick one. I just clean around the eyes. What's that? Where you come from today? Go as far?
No.
You drive.
Music means happiness, it means life, it helps me in the times that are low. It also helps me as well to get things done quicker in life, especially when it comes to depression. It might bring me down sometimes, so with music it might give me the boost to carry on with my everyday life.
can you care for someone without it being reciprocated or there being an exchange? I think that you can. But is it always an exchange? Because I suppose the act of caring, in the act of caring, are you then receiving something in the act of it? Which I often think about our work, is that there is a reciprocal nature to it, because you are getting something from it.
I'm just doing tea and coffees. Do you want anything, Georgia?
I might have to, but I'll come and help make it, because it helps motivate me, and it just, you know, throughout my life, I've always been put down. Like, no one's really appreciated the things that I have achieved, the things that I have done within my life, you know, and it just gives you that emotion that you can be anything, you can do anything, you know, you can be the better of yourself.
We're going to warm up our bodies and we're going to warm up our voices, and just to find ourselves coming into where we are. You don't have to sing, you don't have to move, you don't have to do any of what I'm going to ask you to do, but if you want to, then come with me. So we can all stand up to begin.
Doesn't shake it down.
Music is life, it just gets me through every day, day-to-day things. I just love music.
And we discussed what it feels to be devoid of care, or without sufficient care. To feel we can't tap into care for ourselves or for others, because we have had every sinew stretched for so long that we can't remember the sensation of relaxed muscle. Fear and anxiety, confusion, shock, the sensation that requires numbness and quiet, the clam of disassociation, the numbness of detachment. And we discussed what music and what sound can do to this numbness, to bury and furrow the notes that allow a seepage of connection to joy, pain, remembrance. They enable a wholeness to be felt in these moments, even if only in these moments, the moments of filtered sound and song. And how these sounds can be held in the body, our bodies, the site where containment can happen but is so hard to achieve. But we do achieve it because we are here, so we manage to hold something, the something that is ourselves.
Care to me is really taking an interest in people individually. Everybody has got such different life experiences, and I think care means taking the time to really listen and understand all those different people's needs when it comes to care, and genuinely take the time to help and support them. I really believe that there's no one size fits all. I think a lot of things in society are built on like one structure, one model that only suits a small percentage of people, when we're all completely unique, completely individual, and experience life, difficulties, challenges in completely different ways, and need to be helped and supported in different ways. So to me, care is really about taking into account the person and taking a really like person-centered approach, because we cannot judge anybody that, you know, we have not experienced life in their shoes.
We were on that journey with them, and it helped us as practitioners. Well, it helped me as a practitioner to grow and to appreciate the life I have, and that I was able to give part of myself to them, and they're taking that. There were so many firsts in our relationship with them, and I just hope that they take that on their journey, on their life journey now.
So how would you apparently, where people are standing, how would
We're going to stand.
So I'm just going to now read a really short text about what it means to me to work with people, with other people. And then I'm not going to say any more, and we're just going to play the end of Kessi Pufare and my attempt to sing this pre-opera lament in duet with Sheila Maurice Gray. So please forgive both my singing and my Italian pronunciation. So it's meant to be about the act of the experience, the endeavour, the articulation of the emotion, rather than the polish of the voice. Well, that's what I tell myself, and that's what I tell everyone else. But yeah, well, I hope you enjoy that. So I'll just quickly read this about working with people. If I can say to you that I am damaged, and then by the conversation, realisation, informed formalisation of an idea, a line, or a garden that we grow, I am changed. Then tomorrow I will consider different dimensions, the length and stretch of time, travel to a different land in a room with someone else, with someone else's. I might touch a different reincarnation of self, and that self might begin to understand the pain of a loss that chafes and connects with one I know. This might be called empathy. It might be carried across tides and through melodies, and therefore when I speak to my mother who has died, I think different words. When I listen to a child, the syllables I hear may change. When I ask you to sing, you sing the sound of a gunshot, the love of water. You taste the salt of oppression, and I feel the heat sting of rain. You speak the scratch of a plant's thorn, the stroke of the dawn. When you move, you are crawling. When you dance, you glide. When we see one another, jump to one side. Reach out a foot so that toes can collide. If we believe in possibility, we can collapse and ride through and across time, destabilizing the restraints that constrict blood to our minds. Okay, now we'll have my singing.
Quando hai un compito, quando hai un impegno, ma non ti accorgi né di avere paura né di avere coraggio, fai quello che devi fare. Poi è possibile che qualche volta ci fosse un leggero brivido perché le cose erano complicate, perché veramente era complicato fotografare nella tua città il nemico che abitava nella tua città. Comunque non c'era né coraggio né paura, l'ho gestito con un senso di disciplina, io dovevo fare quelle foto e le ho fatte. Poi le altre foto, quelle che sono più dolci, più legate alla società civile, alla gente povera, agli zingari, ai malati dello psichiatrico, quello è stato tutto una mia gestione personale. Io ci ho messo tutta la passione che potevo, facendo anche degli errori, perché non è che un fotografo scatta e sono tutte foto belle. Io ho fatto sempre foto brutte e ogni tanto c'è una foto buona. È così, no? È così il mio lavoro. Perché cerco e poi forse qualche volta trovo una buona fotografia. Per cui ho gestito in momenti diversi, con sentimenti diversi il mio lavoro. Per disciplina, perché il mio giornale voleva che io fotografassi quella cosa e io dovevo farla, e poi per i fatti miei ho fotografato come volevo, a seconda anche degli anni. Per esempio ora che domando a tutte le donne di spogliarsi per fotografarle nude, secondo me io dentro di me ho un desiderio di rivalsa contro il mondo, di rabbia, per cui dico io la appiccico nuda, la donna libera, senza la sensualità che voi volete, una sensualità privata, intima, elegante. Per cui, in anni diversi, capito? Però lo spirito è sempre lo stesso, è sempre quello di non calare la testa e di andare a fronte alta. Finito? Ok. Ciao.
Grazie.
Grazie a te. Grazie. Ora spogliati.
Tears and rasp, blades have surely sliced and torn those cords in throat of raffiaed skin. Tears of then, tears of tomorrow, tears of feeling old, glinting eye, soft hand on my cheek, kiss on my arm. Tears and rasp, blades have surely sliced and torn those cords in throat of raffiaed skin. Poems of brother, beloved, face off of song, battle across valleys. Tears and rasp, blades have surely sliced and torn those cords in throat, that throat of raffiaed skin. Come back, you said, come back.
Si può fare che si può fare, le stelle rubelle non hanno pietà, pietà non hanno pietà. Che si può fare, se cielo nata un impulso di pace. devo dire che si può dire.
If you want, yeah. No, I mean, everywhere you want. Okay, so it's time for questions now. So, who wants the mic?
Hi, Helen. Thank you for the beautiful talk. I guess it's more of a comment, maybe, or formulating a question. I was sort of interested in your sort of desire to kind of document the interior life, your interior life, but also your subjects and your collaborators' interior life. And it's also, I guess, I also make quite interior work in some ways. How do you sort of negotiate this kind of extraction in some ways? Because it is sort of exposing yourself in a very vulnerable way. And also, sort of a second question is, how do you kind of take care of yourself? Because also you talk about, in your sort of talk, you're talking about how you take care of your collaborators and the tenderness you have, but also, I guess, the important is how do you sort of look after yourself too?
I mean, I guess there's something about if you're, or I feel, if I'm asking of other people to reveal, and it always is an ask. So in all of the films, even if somebody is speaking to camera, we will have had many, many meetings in order to talk about what somebody might say, what they might want to say, how they feel about saying what they're saying, and whether they feel comfortable. For example, in the long note, there were two women who I met in a cafe in Derry, and they were really important in the shirt factories in Derry, but they had said they had never talked about Bloody Sunday, which was when there was a kind of police attack and an army attack on a peaceful demonstration in Derry, and people were killed. And one of these women had talked about stepping over her cousin dead on the floor, and that she hadn't talked about it in all the years until that moment in the cafe, because I was asking. And then I said, okay, I was going to ask if I could film you talking about that. And she said, oh no, I could never talk about it. And I said, that's absolutely fine. And then she said, but you can. And so there's sometimes a kind of passing of responsibility. And so I said, okay, well, let's write it down. How shall we write it? So this is a very long-winded answer, I'm sorry. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a negotiation of how stories are told, and that's really important to me. And there's something about the meeting and the connectedness that happens in a situation where I might go in and know what I want to have a conversation about, and then it's a completely different conversation that happens. And so there's something about having an idea and an intent, and then being able to let that completely flow away if that's not what's going to happen, and to go with what might happen. And so it's about being brave enough to go with the unexpected or the unknown. And how do I look after myself? I don't know. I think in the making, I don't need to, in many ways. I'm really fed by it. And maybe in some ways, that's what I have to be wary of, the feeling of extracting. And so the processes are, for example, in Kessu Pufare, there were people also who didn't want to be in front of camera, but wanted to be part of the film in some way. So there was a group of women that even though my Italian is terrible, I had some Italian language lessons with. And none of them wanted to be in front of the camera. But actually the experience of being in that room has informed the way that then I wrote some other texts. We did a massage class together that was run at the centre. And so all of these things are happening around. So, there were many people that I spoke to that are not in the film, and that's because they have chosen not to be in the film. But they have informed the process of the film, and they have informed the way, for example, what I'm looking at that's not on the screen there is a shot of the centre that we did the massage class in. So their presence is there in the absence. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah. That's fine, we can have a glass of wine.
Maybe I have a question about voice. I have a question about the voice. If you can, tell us a little bit more about it, about the importance of it. Because, for example, with Eloise, we are opening in a couple of weeks an exhibition about the use of voice, written, not only with the sound of your voice. So if you could, tell us a little bit more about the importance of it, also the music, which is, something that it's very important in your practice.
Well, I guess I feel that voice is essential to everything in life. It doesn't have to come out of your voice if you're someone who can't speak, but it's about having a fingerprint that you leave in the world. And it's about, for me, the significance of what we do with our voice when we're using it. So that fingerprint leaves a trace. And those traces, as they build up, build stories, build histories, but they also can break them down. And so, I guess we can see in terms of protests across Europe about what's happening in Israel, with Israel in Gaza, to the Palestinian population. There's something about how voice can be used in different ways, to uplift, to cry, to sing, to kind of smash something that we don't believe in, and to shout about something we do believe in. And so there's something about voice that has all of these different registers. And then, of course, there's the voice that is completely silenced. And that, when I was talking about the kind of the voice that sits under the surface, because no voice is ever absent. It's always there, but it's whether it's intentionally silenced or quashed. And so even with those voices, people have voices, and those voices stay, and they have a presence, and they'll always be there. And so it's kind of futile to quash any kind of voice, I suppose, is what I think. And so I think it's this exploration of something that is prevalent in every society. It belongs to us. We have it. We can do something with it. We have to find it in different moments. It changes in different settings. And so it's almost, for me, the most fascinating part of the human experience is what we do with our voice. Mm. Well, I mean, I suppose in every situation it's different. I think people manage trauma in different ways, and so when some people want to use their voice and some people silence their voice because it's a way of protecting them. And, you know, the two women in the cafe, that was what they had chosen to do. And then there were a number of other women that were present who were really happy to speak, and as activists that's how they protected themselves, that's how they managed to survive, was speaking out. So I suppose that's what I mean, we all use different strategies of what we do with our voice, and we have control of it, and actually that's really an empowering, if we think of it in that way, it's actually really empowering that we have control over what we do with our own voice. And I think one of the most moving things about the project working with the women who had their children removed was that they had all had experiences of voice being taken from them or forced out of them. So there was one woman who was like, there's absolutely no way you're going to get me singing anywhere, whether it's in this room or whether it's to anybody else. And we were like, that's fine. Would you like to stay with us while we do it? And she said, yeah, I'll stay. And then by maybe 2 sessions, she said, okay, I'm going to mime. I won't sing, but I'll mime. And then there was another woman who sang with her hand over her mouth. And then we started to talk about what was it about the voice coming out. And it is that it really speaks the pain. It speaks the pain. And 2 of those women said, actually, I'm not sure if I can risk it. But they did, and they were incredibly brave, and they did perform. One other woman had to be very drunk for the performance, but she came, and she stood at the back, and the other 2 women who were standing at the back supported her, and she knew every word, and she sang all the way through. But she needed to do something to mediate the pain in order to sing. So yeah, I guess I'm just saying we manage trauma differently, all of us, and the voice comes out differently depending on how we manage it.
Can I jump in as well? Well, the first thing I wanted to say was I just thought that was beautiful and extremely moving, so thank you very much. I really, really loved it. And I thought your performance of Barbara Strozzi was beautiful as well. Okay. You know, in perhaps a different way from the way she wrote it, but I thought it was beautiful. I was just thinking about what you said about the voice and control, and it made me think, well, it's a personal anecdote, but my father in the last 10 years of his life had Alzheimer's, and for probably the last 5 years he stopped, he was completely non-verbal, he didn't speak anymore. But if my brother plucked the chords on my father's guitar of the country and western songs that he grew up singing, he burst into full song. Yeah. He knew all the words. His voice was really strong. Yeah. But in a sense, it wasn't controlled. It was something even beyond that. It was the only time we heard his voice in those last years of his life, but it was incredibly powerful and joyful when we did. Yeah. So when we got together for Christmas or any other family situation, we all just sang, because that was a way to communicate. There is something incredibly... I mean, it goes even beyond volition, doesn't it, on some level? It's not really a question, but it just kind of came bubbling up as you were talking about the risks that one takes with voice, but also how sometimes it's more powerful than even our conscious desire to control it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Helen, thank you for a very generous talk. I'd like to maybe hear a little bit more about something you said, and you again just mentioned the strategies that artists use, and maybe it's a simplistic sort of idea, but people often think artists, hone a skill like making paintings or performing or whatever it is, and they get as good as they can with it. But you seem to be drawn towards a paradoxical sort of other strategy, which is like, I mean, I really enjoyed your singing, but from what you said, you're learning, you were a beginner at singing
Yeah.
and learning something. So it puts you in a very scary, exposed position. But it also seems paradoxical with regard to how artists work. So it'd be nice to, could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of artists are, maybe the honing of the skills are around the ideas, for me, I suppose. And whilst I shoot my own films, I edit my own films, like I want to be really good at that. There are other mediums that I might want to work in and with because the material is asking of it or my ideas are asking of it. And I know that I don't have the capacity to be really good at it. But what I do know is that I want the work to speak. And so if I need the work to be good and I can't do it, then I'll work with somebody to support me, to enable me to get to that place. But actually, I am more interested in ideas. I'm more interested in risk. And not that I'm not jumping off anything. I'm not talking about that kind of risk. But I guess the kind of risk that's about, I mean, I sat there, my heart was beating playing that because it's really exposing. But there's something really important to me about if I am asking other people to speak with me, to share in an idea that I might be proposing, and I've had the time to plan it, think about it, research it, and then I speak with them or I ask them to join me somehow, then they are taking risks and they are trusting that I will care for what they are giving or sharing or collaborating on. And so for me, somehow, the idea of risk has to come all the way through the process, and that includes me. Yeah, I don't know if that answers that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it almost seems like the singing or the something else that happens, the film editing, almost like a sort of decoy device. And actually, your core strengths as an artist is something else, is bringing people together or drawing something out. Would you agree?
Maybe. I think that's a really large part of how I work. Yes, I am. I would describe myself as a socially engaged practitioner. I do have that practice, and it feeds the work, and it feeds me, and so that's what I know about myself as an artist. But actually, all the other things, for example, thinking about a 3-screen work as the film unfolds, there's this kind of slippage that's trying to do something that's kind of interrupting kind of duration and time. And again, it's about ideas. And whether that works or it doesn't work, obviously I want it to work, but the kind of endeavour of thinking about how it might work and thinking about how to edit in a way that there can be this kind of slippage of different planes of duration or time or geography is really important to me. And if I was doing, a kind of individual performance now, the moving from spoken word into singing and then back again, and then there's something about the process and the risk-taking that's involved that's exciting for me.
Hi, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I wanted to ask you, or whether you could speak to another aspect of kind of skill and in your work. I hope it's not too prosaic a question, but about your use of colour that you said was really important to you, and which I just found really striking in the images that you showed in the slideshow and also in the films. It just seemed, I was wondering, how maybe colour contributes to the stories that you're telling or brings certain aspects out.
I mean, I think in the same way as song is a kind of carrier for stories, colour, it does the same thing, if we think about signs. But it's also, I suppose, for me, it's about the haptic quality of work, the idea that we want to touch something. And if we want to touch it with our hands, if there's this sensation of the haptic, then you're pulled towards it. if you want to touch something, you know, like if you're looking at clothes or whatever in a shop and you have a little feel of what they feel like, because you see the colour first, but then you want to feel the material of them. And I think for me that's a bit of a test. There's something about the reaching towards, which for me I hope colour does in everything, in the print work, in the films. And I think the first time I showed a series of screen prints, they're really big, dense block colours with a kind of suspension. The text just kind of floats in these kind of colour canvases. And it was in quite a small gallery. And people were going round, like, trying to touch them, until the people who were invigilating were, like, you know, stopping people. But there is something about it as a strategy to enable people to be drawn into the story, or to be drawn into the work, or to allow them to sit with a text that's floating. Those things are really important, and they're intentional. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you.